Okay, welcome to week 5 of Introduction to Flash at Santa Rosa Junior College, fall 2012. Today we're going to be talking about creating basic animations, keyframes, and the timeline, tweening, motion guides, shape tweening, motion presets, animating masks, as well as shape hints. If we have time, we'll touch on IK poses and 3D tools, but these will most likely be subjects for a later class. Our homework for next week is to review some videos that are on the Adobe website that review all of the Flash basics that we've covered over this last 5 weeks, and to read lesson 5 from the book and practice those exercises. Just as a reminder, your homework that is due as of midnight tonight is based on this tutorial that covers static backgrounds, frame by frame, and shape tween animations. And it's very important that you watch that video in order to have success with that homework assignment. So with that being said, we're going to dive into our subjects for this afternoon, this morning, and specifically we're going to start with talking about keyframes and the timeline. So if you do have any questions, feel free to bring them up. So I'm looking at a little blank Flash file that I set up here, just with a little bit of explanation. And we'll talk a little about, first of all, the various keyboard shortcuts that you can use when you're working with Flash. And the reason that I start with this is because these are 3 shortcuts that really are fundamental to working quickly and easily in Flash. So there is adding a frame, which is F5, adding a keyframe, which is F6, and adding a blank keyframe, which is F7. You can use the Shift plus any of these to take away frames. So it's important also to know that the Shift key, whereas these keyboard shortcuts that I set up for you right over here are related to adding frames. Let's just make sure that that's crystal clear. Adding frames of different types. Whereas these keyboard shortcuts are for adding frames, the other ones are designed for removing frames. Let's resize this a little bit so we can see this nicely. Okay, so once more, let's just make this nice and clear here. There we go. Once more, we can add frames of these differing types with these keyboard shortcuts, and we can take away frames with using the Shift key with those exact same keyboard shortcuts. So now let's talk about what those frames actually are. Well, I can hide this layer and we can just dive into the whole explanation. So I'm going to hide this explanation and I'm going to select this keyframe right here. And notice I referred to this as a keyframe because it's a empty circle on the timeline. And each of these numbers on the timeline, of course, represent one slice of time based on our frame rate. So for this default production, our frame rate is 24 frames per second. We see that in the Properties panel. Therefore, each one of these slices here represents 1/24th of a second. And this circle represents a spot where we can put content. If there was no circle there, we would not be able to put any content on that frame, because you need to have a keyframe in order to put in content. So I just have a star tool here, and I'm going to just get rid of my stroke on that. I have no stroke, I have a fill, and I'm just going to create this little star and select the star and move it to wherever I want. And you see what happened to that frame is it is no longer empty. It's no longer a white outlined circle. It is now a gray frame with a black circle on the inside. That indicates that this is a keyframe. If I wanted to continue to, let's say, have this star appear on my stage for 1 second without any movement, I would put my cursor at frame 24 and hit the F5 key. So here's my explanation. F5 adds just frames, right? So if I hit the F5 key, then what we see in the timeline is we see a gray bar. And the first frame of the gray bar has a black circle. That indicates that this is a keyframe. The last frame has a white rectangle. That simply indicates that this is an end frame. It's the last frame in the production. So this is an example of a timeline that is what we would call a static timeline, and I can even indicate that here. Static timeline. There's no animation in that timeline, and all it shows is that we have a keyframe at the beginning, we have an end frame at the end, and we added these frames by using the F5 keyboard shortcut. If I wanted to, so we'll call this static timeline. If I wanted to have some type of animation, then I would have to have a keyframe at either end. 2 keyframes. Okay? So I'll bring this down below and make sure it says 2 keyframes. And we see as soon as we create a new layer, it starts with a keyframe. Okay? There's a keyframe there already, and since we stretched this timeline out to 1 second or 24 frames, the new layer automatically matches that number of frames. Our explanation layer, as you can see, still only has 1 frame. So if I wanted to have this extend out to the same amount of frames as the other layers, I would have to put my cursor over here and what keyboard shortcut? That's exactly right. And hit the F5 keyboard shortcut, and there I have the explanation layer that also has 1 keyframe at the beginning, an end frame which is indicated by a white rectangle at the end, and it's simply a gray timeline. By the way, my explanation layer is not showing because I was hiding it by clicking on the icon below the eyeball. So now I've got this explanation. I've got this static timeline, but I also want to have a 2 keyframe situation here. So I've got my first frame, and I'll put something else on it. Well, we'll just be simple here. I'll put a circle, and we see that that creates a keyframe on the first frame, and it goes all the way out to the end, right? So if I wanted to have some type of animation occur on that layer, what I have several options, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new keyframe by selecting Insert Keyframe, or I right-clicked and selected Insert Keyframe, or I could also hit the F6 key. And since I've been talking to you about these keyboard shortcuts, I'll do that, F6. So now I have a keyframe at the end and a keyframe at the beginning. Notice that it copies the content of that layer, because we're looking at the 2 keyframes layer. It copies that circle onto that other keyframe. Now I can move that circle. I could change that circle's color. I could change the shape of the circle if I wanted to. And then basically I've got 2 keyframes. Now it just changes from one to the other, and if I wanted to, I would create in this case, a certain type of animation, a certain type of tween from this shape on this first keyframe to this shape on the last keyframe. And Caroline's saying a motion tween, but take a look at what we have here. Look at this object, look in the properties panel in the top, and notice what it says there. That's correct, a shape tween, because you cannot do motion tweens unless the object is a symbol. So what I could do here is simply put my cursor anywhere between these two keyframes on the timeline, right-click, and say Create Shape Tween. Now before I do that, just to see what would happen if I tried to create a motion tween, it would say the selected item cannot be tweened. You must convert this to a symbol. Okay? Or I could try to trick it and say create a classic tween, and I'll talk to you in a little while about what that's about. And you see what it does is it tells you that it's creating a classic tween, but it doesn't really tween. It tweens the location, but it does not tween the shape. So I'm going to undo that by going Command or Control Z, and then I'm going to do what I should have done at the beginning, which is to create a shape tween. And then when I create the shape tween, you see several things have happened. Number one, the timeline now has an arrow extending from the first keyframe to the last keyframe, and the timeline has become green. So this is an example of two keyframes that are shape tweening. Okay? So that's your basic explanation in terms of keyframes and the timeline. I'm going to bring up my explanations window again for a second because there's a little bit more I can share with you about this. So we talked about adding a frame. We talked about adding keyframes. Now, adding blank keyframes is what I could have done instead of putting that second keyframe on this timeline with the circle. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to go back. There we go. I've gone back to before I put the second keyframe in. Here's my first keyframe. I take that same circle. I put it right over here. Now, if I wanted there to be a different animation happening, if I wanted this circle to tween into a different shape, instead of adding a keyframe here, what I could do is add a blank keyframe. And I could do that by hitting the F7 key. So if I hit F7, we see that last frame is empty and it has a circle in it. It's saying, okay, you can put some data on here, but you haven't done so yet. So I could go over there and I can choose to put a blue circle. That's not what I wanted. I can choose to put a blue star. So in a sense, it's a placeholder. Yeah, and so yeah, if that helps in terms of how you think about it, that's fine. The main thing to remember is as soon as you put content on it, it went from being white with an empty circle to being gray with a black circle, indicating that that keyframe now has content. And now I could do the same thing, create shape tween, and we see that that circle shape tweens into that star. Its color changes, its location changes, and its shape changes. So that pretty much covers the ideas related to keyframes. F5, F6, and F7 adds regular frames, keyframes, and blank keyframes. And the converse is that the Shift plus any of these keyboard combinations takes these frames away. So let me just expand on that and then we'll really have it finished. So we see this lasts for 1 second. Let's say we only wanted it to last for a half a second. Well, what I could do is I can look at the number of frames I have, which is 24, and I can divide that by 2, which is 12, because I know that 12 frames is equal to a half a second. So I can click and drag through all 3 layers, select 12 frames, and then just hit the Shift F5 key, because what I am removing here are simply frames. And frames represent slices of time, whereas keyframes represent not only slices of time, but represent changes in content. Frames simply represent slices of time. So if I go Shift F5, now my animation is a half a second long. Okay? If I wanted to add frames to that, I can click and drag down through all of those and just keep on hitting the F5 key, and you see frames are being added and it slows down the animation. If I go Shift F5, I'm taking frames away. Okay? Shift F6 and Shift F7 take keyframes and frames away. The only problem with that is that you have to be careful, because once you take keyframes away, then you can end up in situations that you don't want to be in. So, any questions about keyframes and the keyboard shortcuts that are associated with them? Pretty straightforward. So, I'm going to go on to discussing the various tweening types with you. So, we're now going to be talking about tweening. There are basically 3 different types of tweens, and then one thing that we'll just call other, because it doesn't have the word tween in it. So first of all, what is a tween? A tween is when you take content from one keyframe and you either morph it or transform it into content on another keyframe. So, with that being said, there are 3 types of tweens, 2 of which are closely related, and then there's one thing called other. We'll start with the motion tween. Motion tween rules. Number 1, you can only motion tween symbols. Number 2, every motion tween has to be put on its own layer. Number 3, the number of frames that are added when you click on the timeline and select motion tween is equal to the frame rate. And number 4, motion guides are specifically for classic tweens. So with that background, let's create a motion tween layer. Okay, so I'm going to hide this explanation. I'm going to go to my motion tween layer, and I'm going to make a star. I have to use the star tool to do that. Okay, and the first thing we're going to do, hold on just one second, please. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do, because of the fact that this is going to be a motion tween, what do I have to do to this shape? Make a symbol. That's right. So, just like it says here, motion tweens and classic tweens have to be done with symbols. So I select this, and here's another keyboard shortcut that we've talked about before. We've said F5, 6, and 7 have to do with frames. F8 has to do with converting an existing object into a symbol. So I'm going to say GR star because it's a graphic symbol type, and I want to always start with my graphic symbol types with GR. And I click on Okay, and now this is no longer simply a shape, it is now a graphic symbol. If I wanted to motion tween that, I can right-click and say Create Motion Tween, and notice it creates a motion tween that lasts for 24 frames because that's my frame rate. And you'll notice that the color of the motion tween timeline is blue, and also the icon to the left of the word motion tween shows some kind of movement. It's like a box with a shadow, something makes it look like it's moving. Now let's say I wanted this tween to last for 2 seconds. I simply drag the timeline out. Knowing that 2 seconds would be 48 frames, I've dragged it out for 2 seconds. Now right now it's not tweening at all because I haven't moved it. But what I can do is put my cursor wherever it is that I want the animation to end. Let's say I want the animation to end on frame 35. I put my cursor on frame 35 and I move my object to wherever I want it to end. And you see what happens is that Flash automatically puts in another keyframe. The keyframe with creating motion tween timeline paradigm looks a little different. It looks more like a little star. Okay, so we see that the object tweens from point A to point B, which is at frame 35, and then it stays there because that's where I place my playback head when I move my object. If I wanted to move it again, all I have to do is now select it and move it up to the top, and we see it added another keyframe. Now let's say I wanted it to go back to its home spot. I drag this out, but this is where it gets, this is where it gets tricky. It's dragging out the keyframes with it. What I have to do if I want to add essentially more frames and then move it afterwards, I have to hold the, that's not the key. I have to, this is where I have to do my, I have to hold the Shift key. Yep, I hold the Shift key and it puts in more frames. And now I can drag that to wherever it is I want it to go. So now this motion tween starts on frame 1. At frame 35 we see a keyframe. It goes down to the bottom right hand side of the screen. At frame 48 it goes to the top right side of the screen. And at frame 70 it goes back to a point very similar to where it started. The entire animation lasts roughly 3 seconds. I think it would have to be 72 in order to be 3 seconds, so I can drag this out just 2 more frames, and now it lasts for 3 seconds. You'll see down at the bottom, below the timeline, it shows the number of frames right over here. It shows your frame rate, and it shows actually how much time the entire animation has transpired at that point. If I drag the playback head, watch how those numbers change. In other words, at frame 35, it's 1.5 seconds. So the information right below the timeline is very useful in order to know what frame you're at, what your frame rate is, and how much time has elapsed. So that's the process of creating a motion tween. It's really a straightforward process. And a little later we're going to get into how it works with the motion editor so you can customize it quite a bit. But right now we're just talking about your basic motion tween. What about the next type of tween, which in the explanation says shape tween? Okay, well we've kind of already looked at that in the last little segment, but we'll just do that real quick again, and we'll add to that as we go along. Here's my shape tween layer. I'm going to hide my explanation. Remember, shape tweens can only be done to shapes, not to symbols, and you can have as many of those on a single layer as you want, although that gets very messy and difficult for the CPU to process. So I've got my motion tween layer, I've got my shape tween layer, and here on my shape tween layer I might do something like this. Let's set this up a little bigger and change the color. I put the letter F, and I'm going to go F6, 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 and F6. So essentially put that letter F in all those different places. So this is a nice, easy workflow. I can change that F to L on frame 10. I can change it to A on frame 20. I can change it to S on frame 30. I can change it to H on frame 40. And on frame 50, I'll change it to Flash. And on frame 60, I'll change it to Flash Rocks. Okay? And then I'll get rid of this keyframe here by going Shift F6. Okay? Remember that keyboard shortcut that I showed you earlier. The Shift F6 key will allow you to remove a keyframe, and you see how much time that saves you if you do it that way. Well, right now this is not a shape tween layer because those aren't shapes; those are letters. So the question is, how can I take these letters and convert them to shapes? And that's something that we've done before. It's a keyboard shortcut that I've talked about. Okay, that's the answer. Control B. So I go Control B 2 times, and it takes that letter and breaks it into a shape. So Control B 2 times for each of those letters. So now I have these letters, which are no longer letters, they're just vector shapes. And now I can take the whole layer. This is kind of cool. I can take the whole layer by selecting the name of the layer, right-clicking on it, and I could say, oh, come on, it should give me the option of doing this. Oh, it used to do it. Oh, now it froze. Excellent. Here we go. I can select the whole layer. Okay, I've selected the whole layer. Now I'll right-click in there and say Create Shape Tween. Yep, and there it goes. So now, look what happened to that layer. It created a shape tween between each of the keyframes. Okay? Each of the keyframes is now connected to the next keyframe by a forward-moving arrow, and the timeline shows that it is green, and that means that there is a shape tween occurring. But notice at the end here, it has a broken dotted line because it's saying you wanted to make a shape tween, but there's no keyframe at the end here to shape tween into. And the truth is I didn't want to shape tween it because this is the static section, so I can choose Remove Tween, and that just removes the tween from that static section. So see what happens here. I put my cursor at the beginning. The F becomes an L, which becomes an A, which becomes an S, which becomes an H, which becomes Flash, which becomes Flash Rocks. Okay, I can see that whole thing by hitting the Enter key. One more time. So what we have is we have motion tweening and classic tweening. Motion tweening happens to symbols. Each motion tween is on its own layer, and the tween length matches the frame rate. You can add frames, as I showed, by simply dragging the timeline out towards the right. Motion guides are for classic tweens. We haven't gotten to that yet. Then we went straight to shape tweens. We knew that shape tweens happen to shapes only, and I'm mentioning here, we haven't done this yet, that you can use shape hints to control how those shapes tween. So let's continue and flesh out a couple of things that we see here that it says, for example, motion guides for classic tweens. And I'm going to hide the explanation and show our tweens again. So here's our motion tween and shape tween. Let's hide the shape tween for a second and talk about the motion tween. And the reason why is because the explanation that I had there talked about motion guides. So back in CS4 and before, the only way that you could kind of change the appearance, how this tween moved from one point to the other, would be to add motion guides. In other words, if you wanted it to travel in a much more interesting path, you would have to have a whole nother layer to do that. You can still do that with classic tweens, and we'll get to that. But I want to show you how, with a regular motion tween, how you simply do that by dragging the timeline and then putting maybe a keyframe in a new spot. And if you want to add some different shape to it, you can, whoops, let me try that again. And if you want to add some new shape to it, you can insert a keyframe for position there, and then you can start adding different motions, right? So I can continue to maybe flesh out how this animation occurs in a way that looks a little bit more natural. And we see that we're following a more interesting path. And that path was created simply by selecting the frame, selecting any spot along the timeline, and rolling my cursor over that path, and then dragging on it. On these endpoints, I can drag them out so they go further, right? So now we get an animation that looks like that. Okay? So that's how we add motion to a motion tween layer. But how does that relate to a classic tween? And what does a classic tween look like? So, back in the old days, can you make new endpoints on the fly? New endpoints on the fly. When you say endpoints, you want me to, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by endpoints. Do you mean changing the number of frames? Like corners. Oh, I see what you're saying. You mean, in other words, take this point right here and change its location? Changing direction. If I wanted to change the direction, the way I would change the direction, if that's what you're asking, is I would simply select the layer, right-click on it, and say reverse keyframes. And then it goes the other way. Okay. Why don't you type that in, and when I see it, I'll respond to it. And in the meantime, I'll talk a little bit more about classic tweens while you're thinking that through. So we've got another layer here called classic tween. And one other thing that I'll mention as I continue with the explanations is that the shape tween layer and the classic tween layer have the same little icon next to them. You'll notice my explanation layer has a different icon. It's just got a different icon. And then the motion tween layer has a third icon that just indicates some movement. Can you make any of the other points a point where the object turns a corner rather than going along an arc? Well, when you say turns a corner, you can make something turn a corner when you get into the 3D mode. and 3D mode happens to movie clip symbols. So if you want to do something like that, you would have to use a specific type of symbol, and that would be a movie clip symbol, which would enable you all those little points. Well, no, the big points are the only ones that you can change unless you jump to any of these other spots. So I can jump to this spot here, for example, and I can right-click on it, and I could, let's see, let me try that again. I could jump to any spot, right-click on that frame, and I can say insert any of these types of frames, like a rotation frame, a skewing frame, a scaling frame, a position frame. And that would create another frame. So let's say I wanted to add a frame there, and I wanted it to rotate. I could rotate that at that frame right there. So it starts a rotation, and it's the rotation frame that I just added that enabled me to do that. Okay? So you can, yeah, it's a little tricky to get real clear in my head exactly what we're talking about. You need to add keyframes of some kind in order to make any changes to your animation. That's exactly correct. So we've seen our shape tween. Let's hide this. We've seen our shape tween. It's taking a shape and just changing how the shape appears, right? And it looks green, and it connects one keyframe to the next. We've seen our motion tween, and that's where a symbol can move around. It could also change color. It can rotate. It happens on a blue timeline, and every time we add some new feature, we would then see a new keyframe show up. Okay, so here I'd have to add another feature there, and then rotate it again here. It's not adding the keyframe there. Let's try it again. Insert rotation frame. There we go. And then I could take it and rotate it. There we go. Okay, and now we're going to see a third type of tween, which is how we used to create tweens with symbols before. So I'm on my empty blank keyframe of my classic tween layer, and I will use the brush tool and make a little face here. Woohoo! Yeehaw! Okay, I'll select all of that and change its color. Okay, and I'll take that and convert it into a symbol by hitting the F8 key, and I'll call it GR face. Okay, and that face is now on all 72 frames of that classic tween layer. But I might want to have the face start small, get bigger in the middle, and then disappear. So what I would do is I would take the face, hold the Shift key down, make it smaller. I'll just put it in the center, moving it around with my Shift keys and my arrow keys. And then I'll go out to frame 30, and I'll right-click and add a keyframe. And then I'll hold the Shift key and I'll make it bigger. And then I'll go out to frame 60 and I'll right-click and I'll insert another keyframe. Or, of course, I could have hit the F6 key. and then I'll make it smaller. And in the process of it becoming smaller, I'll have had its tint change to red. And all I have to do to make a classic tween here is right-click and say Create Classic Tween. And then I'll do it between these two keyframes, right-click, Create Classic Tween. So you see it starts green in the center, it gets bigger, and then as it gets smaller, it changes color to red. And then maybe here, I'll put another keyframe here at the end, and I will then change the alpha to 0. Okay, and then right-click and say Create Classic Tween. So you can see a couple of things. It's pretty easy to do, and especially if this is how you grew up with Flash, that's how we always did it until CS4. It was kind of weird when CS4 came out, or was it CS5, and all of a sudden we were doing these new motion tweens. But you can see what happens with a classic tween is very similar to a shape tween. You create a keyframe, you create another keyframe, you right-click between the two keyframes, and you choose the type of tween that you want. And as you see, the end result of that is we have very similar effect between a motion tween and a classic tween. But you'll notice you don't have that line that you see around the symbol with the motion tween. So that begs the question, how can you get the motion to do more of what you want it to do? In other words, let's say I don't want this to go from the center and back out like that. Maybe I want it to circulate around the stage in a really nice circular motion. What I'd have to do then is add a new type of layer on top of the classic tween layer and call it a motion guide. So I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to double click on it and call it motion guide. A motion guide is what this classic tween will follow in order to create its motion. There are a lot of cool things about motion guides that I find make them better than motion tweens. So I'm going to select this pencil. I'm going to make sure my pencil is nice and black so I can see it. And I'm just going to do a little drawing here. Let's see. I'm going to go down and around and back. Whoops, that's a little too messy. Let me try that again. I'll go, let's see, select that layer. Let me lock all my layers except for that one. Okay, I'll start up here and go down and around. Okay, and I'll select that little end point right there and get rid of it. And I'll select this whole path and make sure it's nice and smooth. I'm using my smooth tool to smooth that out a little bit. And now I'm going to unhide my classic tween layer and see how this whole thing gets put together. So here I've got this thing called motion guide, and here I've got this thing called classic tween. Right now they look like they're the exact same type of layer. This is what I have to do. I right-click on the motion guide layer. I choose where it says Add Classic Motion Guide. As soon as I do that, we see there's this shape above it. Well, I didn't want to add the classic guide. I want this to become a guide. So I'll just say that this is a guide layer. And what I'll do below it is I will say properties. This is a little just give me a second because I should be able to. They make some changes and I didn't know that they did this one. So it used to say guided. Okay, so what I'll have to do is I'll do it a little different. I'll get rid of this layer, rewind. I'm going to now create this new layer. Nope, let me undo that. I'm going to select the classic tween, and I'm going to say add classic motion guide. And it puts, yeah, that's how we need to do it. You create the layer that, you select the layer that you want to have following a guide. So I'll show you again. You select the layer that you want to have following a guide. You right-click on that and say Add Classic Motion Guide. And then you get this little pencil thing here, and you see this little shape, and the layer beneath it gets indented. So now, when I select this first frame here, and I draw my guide. Oh, come on. I have to select that first frame and draw. I've got the frame. Why is it not allowing me to write on here? That's how we create motion guides. Oh, that's because I'm not selecting the pencil. I'm selecting this icon over here. That doesn't make sense. There we go. I've got the pencil selected. Now I can add my classic motion guide. Okay. Now I can maybe select that whole motion guide. I can actually make it a little bigger this way by holding the transform tool, positioning it where I want it to be, using the arrow keys to get it where I want it to be. And now you see it says Guide Classic Tween, and beneath it, it says Classic Tween. But right now there's no connection between those two things. You see, it's simply just getting bigger. So the question is, how do I hook this guide into this animation? And what I do is I select the keyframe, and I start it from wherever it is that I want this to start. And you'll see in the center of that keyframe, in the center of that object, there's this circle, like right on the nose there. And that circle is going to be connected to, I'm going to have to lock this guide so I make sure I have the tween selected here. The circle is connected to that line which serves as our tween. I go to this next keyframe, and notice that circle is also connected to that line. It gets bigger as we get closer, and that makes some sense. We go out over here, and we want it maybe to be someplace else along this tween. So we drag it there, and we see that circle is snapped to that tween. And then finally, at the end, we want it to, let me get the right tool for this. At the end, we want it to end up over there. So now that we've selected each one of these frames and connected that center circle, which is the registration point of the symbol, to the motion guide, then what we see is that it follows that guide. And the reason that it goes back there is because there's this thing called the halfway point. We have to get it to the halfway point in order for it to get all the way over to there. So I would go over to here, I would right-click, I would insert a keyframe, and now drag this over to there. Let's say right around there. There we go. So we see that a motion guide gives you really a tremendous amount of control in terms of the placement of your object along a path. The nice thing about the motion guide is that it doesn't print out either. So if I went into test movie mode, I wouldn't see this guide at all. What I would see is this. So it follows that path, but obviously you wouldn't want that pathway to print or to publish when somebody is viewing your file. So that shows you the process of creating the following. It creates, what we've done is we've created motion tweens, and we saw the motion tween down here. And motion tween goes around. Let me hide everything else. So here's our motion tween. We know that motion tweens happen to symbols. If we had multiple tweens, we'd have to put them each on their own layer. We know that the tween length matches. What do you like about classic tween as mentioned? Well, like I said, the thing that I mentioned about the classic tween that I like, let me just finish about the motion tween and then I'll go into the classic. So the motion tween happens on its own layer. The tween length matches the frame rate, and it's very easy to adjust where those, how to change the pathway along that motion tween. The difference, though, between that and the classic tween is that with the classic tween, you can draw any kind of very complicated pattern, and the object beneath that guide layer will follow that pathway. So I like the fact that it is just a little more, it allows me to have a little bit more fine control over it, I think. And maybe it's also because that's how I learned Flash. Finally, besides the classic tween and the motion tween, we have the shape tween, and the shape tween happens to shapes only. As you can see here, the shapes convert into that. And then the last part that we haven't talked about quite yet is the frame by frame. But we talked about that extensively last week. Let me show you two more things here. One related to the shape tween using shape hints. And then we'll talk about the frame by frame. So let's put a little marker. So, using shape hints to control your shape tweens, we're going to look at this. And I'll probably zoom in a little bit on this so we can see it in a little greater detail. So we see the letter F converts to the letter L, converts to the letter A. I might want the F to convert differently to the letter L than it does. First of all, let's say I want, this is the shape tween layer, let me lock everything else. First of all, maybe I want the F to be the L to be a different color. So I'll just choose a different color for my L. Okay, so now it goes from F to L. Right there, we can see how it changes from one shape to the other. And I perhaps want it to change a little differently. So what I can do is I can use what are called shape hints. So what I would do is select that first keyframe of the shape tween layer and select Insert. Where is it now? Okay, let's see. Do I have to select that frame? Where did it go? There. See, it's a funny little program. Make one little mistake and it tries to ruin your day. Okay, I'll select this. Select Insert. Modify. Shape hint, I remember the keyboard shortcut, which is what I always use. Modify, shape hint, add shape hint. Okay, so you choose Modify, shape hint, modify shape, and then add shape hint, which is Control-Shift-H. And notice it puts this little letter, a red letter with the letter A next to it. I'm going to put that right over here. And then I'm going to go Control-Shift-H again. And you can see that knowing the keyboard shortcut for this is pretty important because you usually add a number of shape hints. I'm going to do it 2 more times, Control-Shift-H, Control-Shift-H, and Control-Shift-H. And after I add them, I move them to different points along this letter. Now I go out to frame 10. And you see all 5 of those shape hints are stacked right on top of each other. So what I'm going to do is just review with myself and with you where the shape hints are on the letter F and place them in similar locations on the letter L. So I have A, B, C, D, and then E up here. So I'm going to put E at the top. I'm going to put D over here, C over here, A over here, and B, whoopsie, and B over here. And notice when I move those 4 shape hints to along the edge of the object, what happens is that they go from being red shape hints to green shape hints. And now when I scrub my playback head back to frame 1, notice how it transforms in a much more organic way. Right? So adding shape hints is a time-consuming endeavor, but it makes it much smoother in terms of your transition. So now if I select L and it changes to an A, I would probably need to go through this process again of probably adding a new keyframe here by hitting F6. And then I'll add a second keyframe with each one of these transitions because I'm shape hinting from one to the other. And let's just see how this works overall. So now I have this L here, and I might even, I could have done this a little bit different in the beginning and left a little static section between each of these. I can still do it. Watch what happens if I hit the F5 key. 1, 2, oopsie. I'll put my cursor right here, hit F5, here, F5, here, F5, here, F5, and then right in between these, remove the tween. And then maybe go out to here and add frames so everything matches up. And this one has an extra frame. Shift F5 to remove that. You can't keep using the same 5 points. Nope, unfortunately. So we see this transition goes from here to here. We go out to here, and you see, because of the fact that it kind of already started, probably what I do is I would copy this. I would Shift-Command-V to paste this. And I would do the same thing for each one of these. I'd copy this, delete this, Shift-Command-V to place it. Again, copy this S. Then Shift-Command, take that out, Shift-Command-V to replace it. H, copy, and delete this, and then go Shift-Command-V to replace it. So now we have F becoming L, and we have that same L. I add my shape hints, and it's not that hard once you know the keyboard shortcut, Shift-Command-H. 1, 2, 3, 4. This time I'll just do 4. I'll put my D down here, my C down here, my B up here, and my A over here. I go out to this frame, and let's see where I forgot already where they were. This time I'm going left from the top, so I'll put my D down here, my C down here, my B up here, my A over here, and we have a nice, really cool transition from both the F to the L and the L to the A. So I'm hearing dinging, but I don't see any questions, Caroline. Okay, so we see that that's the process of which how these transitions are made, and you can see it looks a lot better. You need, okay, well, I can zoom in a little bit more. Let's zoom in. There we go. How's that? So you can see that F to the L works really nicely, that L to the A works really nicely, but that A to the S rolls in a way that probably we would not want to see. So I'm going to go Shift-Command-H again 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, and that's something that happens on a regular basis. Sometimes you do this 1, 2, 3, 4, and they seem to have disappeared. Now they're there somewhere. And this happens, and I'm very glad that that happens, because this will happen to you when you're working with shape hints. The shape hints seem to have disappeared, even though I know they're there. I'm going to go Shift-Command-H again, and there it says the letter E, because all those other ones, for some reason, seem to have disappeared, at least temporarily. When I add another one, they kind of come back into the picture. So I've got this time A, B, C. Oh, I do not want to move the letter. I keep on moving the letter. There we go. And there's my A. So I have A, B, C, D. My mouse is having a hard time keeping up here. And that means my processor is getting bogged down by the Java app running. So now I have A, B, C, D. I go out to my letter S, and I probably would leave my E just where it is, but for now I'm going to move it over to the right because it's on top of everything else, right? So A, B, C, D. D is down here. C is over here. B is up here. A is up here. And E can go back to some spot along the edge. So now we have a transition from the A to the S that I still don't particularly like. So what I need to do is I need to really look at how I can change how that rolls. So there's the A, I click, and the B. And I might maybe put this letter E down over here, move this over a little bit. There's a certain amount of non-science involved in this part of the process because you're just eyeballing it and making some adjustments as you go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this D down over to there. And it's still doing a roll that maybe, like I said, you can spend a fair amount of time working with these shape hints. And the important thing to remember is the keyboard shortcut for shape hints. Let's bring this up. Now it's clearly too big. There we go. Hide the rest of my layers. Shape hints. Control Shift H. Okay, Control Shift H. Important keyboard shortcut. Command Shift H for Mac users. So we've looked at keyframes in the timeline, tweening. We've looked at motion guides and how motion guides are for classic tweens. We've looked at shape hints. The only two things that we have not looked at that I want to cover today that are listed on our syllabus are motion presets and animating masks. So let's first take a look at motion presets, and those are really a lot of fun. So I'm going to save this file. I'm going to close it. I'm going to open up a new file. and we'll just call this how about we select this layer and we give this the explanation and we right click on it. This is something that I showed you the icon was different. I'm going to turn this into a guide layer. That doesn't mean a motion guide, it just means a guide. That means it won't print. So this is where you put explanations for files that you're working on. Motion presets. Come on, select that first frame. There we go. It's not that hard. For some reason, it's deselecting when I'm doing this. That is pretty bizarre. Huh. Okay, so this is a very interesting situation where I'm selecting the text tool. I've got a keyframe. I click here, and now if all of a sudden it's working. So that's a processor problem. Motion presets. I think the takeaway for that is not only that it can happen to anybody, but one of the things about Flash is that it can be quite processor intensive, and you if the program is acting in a way that you don't expect, then chances are you're not doing something wrong. Chances are the processor just can't handle the amount of what's going on behind the scenes. Okay, this is a normal layer. Okay, so a couple things that we should know about motion presets. Motion presets, as you would expect, because it's a preset, only occurs to symbols. Okay? So let me just get this situated in a nice little way so we can see it nicely. And move it over. There we go. Motion presets. It only occurs to symbols. And you have to convert something into a symbol before you do anything with it. So I'm going to go to this new layer called presets. And I'm going to select the oval tool. I'm going to get rid of my stroke. I'm going to hold the Shift key and create a little circle. I'm going to select that circle, and I'm going to add a gradient to it. So where it says solid color in my color panel, I'll choose radial gradient, and then I'll choose one of the swatches that I have here. Oh boy. Amazing. Sometimes Flash can be such a challenging little program. I just want to apply this swatch to it. It really is an easy thing to do. You simply select it and you apply it. And it is not doing that. So let me try it this way. Except I don't want that color. I want this color. Oh, Lord. So I'll just change it here because the program is not having fun with me, and nor am I having fun with it. So there's my little shape. Is it trying to apply a gradient to a gradient? No, I was just trying to change the swatch. And anyway, at this point I have it. I'm going to convert this to a symbol. I'll use the keyboard shortcut F8. Thank you. So I select the object, hit the F8 key, and this time I'm going to turn it into a movie clip symbol. We've talked a little about movie clip symbols, and you'll see why I do this. I'm saying MC for movie clip. Click on Okay, and now it's a movie clip symbol. And the reason that I wanted this to be a movie clip is because I want to have a little filter on this to give it a little bit of a drop shadow. Okay, and I can change the angle of the shadow. In this case, I might want to have the shadow above it. We'll say, let's go back to there. That's fine. And we'll spread the distance out a little bit differently. The strength, we'll kick it down a little bit. And we'll blur it a little bit more along both axes. Okay, you can lock those two together. So there's my little ball. It looks more ball-like now that it's a movie clip. I wouldn't have been able to add that shadow were it a graphic symbol. So I'm going to start this ball off the stage into my workspace. And we're going to talk about how I can now use a motion preset and apply it to this symbol. Bottom left-hand corner, I have a panel that says Motion Presets. If you don't see that panel, you simply select Window and go down to where does it say? Yeah, Window, Motion Presets. Okay? I can tear this out so I can see this a little easier, and I can open up this drop down arrow, and I can see there are a variety of motion presets here. I'm going to move this over here so I can see this without obstructing the ball. I can select Bounce In, and we can see how that motion preset looks. Bounce Out, Bounce Smush, Fly In Blur Bottom, etc. All kinds of different approaches that you can use. There's small bounce, multiple bounce. Okay, so in terms of what I'm doing with this object being off the stage, I'm going to choose small bounce, and the object is already selected. All I have to do is now click on Apply and take a look at what happens in the timeline at the top of the screen. So as soon as I do that, the timeline stretches out, adds keyframes in all of these frames along the timeline, and creates essentially a 3-second animation that looks like this. So it's built the animation for me. Now, I can customize it because I want it to happen at the bottom of the stage, right? So I can select the whole thing, and I can bring it down so it bounces right at the bottom of the stage. And then when I play it, we see that. This brings up the subject of how do you really test an object in terms of playing, and we do that in test movie mode. And the keyboard shortcut for test movie mode is Control or Command Enter. So Control Enter or Command Return. And we can see if I go Control Enter, it publishes the movie and shows it like that. Another thing that I can do, though, is I can select each point along the timeline here. Let's see if I can get this showing it the way I want it. I'll select the ball, and it looks like I lost that drop shadow. I certainly did. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that object and get rid of this, make a little room for myself, and add that drop shadow. There's the drop shadow. And then go down over here, and maybe that drop shadow is going to look a little different down there. So I select it, and I can now, I need to make some room for myself. This is one of the problems with the program. When if it's published, is it also saved? It is saved as a SWF when you publish it. That's right. You have to remember, though, where that SWF is located. So then here I go to this next frame, and maybe I want that drop shadow to be, let's see, I want to change the color of the drop shadow when it gets to there. So it starts as a black drop shadow, and it hits there, and it becomes a red drop shadow. It's actually transitioning from black to red all the way across. So probably what I would do is I would go back to black. I would go to a frame before it, insert insert a keyframe. Just hit the F6 key to insert a keyframe. Okay, and then on that next keyframe, change the color of when it strikes. Make it red. Make it blur a little bit more, and I can of course lock these two together. So when one blurs, when they both blur to the same. Okay. Oh, geez, because I locked them too late. Okay, so now I can lock it. So we can see it's a black ball, and as it drops, we see that effect. Okay, and we get back to when it comes back up, maybe we want that drop shadow to be black again and be only 5 pixels. And then when it drops down here, right there, it's about to, it doesn't really make contact yet. So right there, we'll change that color. We'll change that back to red. We'll change the blur to 10. And then we go back here. We want it to go back to black. And this is really a typical workflow in a real-world situation where you're trying to make something look realistic, and it's paying attention to all these little details that does it. It's the time-consuming aspect is kind of typical. Okay, so I select this last one, turn it back to black, get this back to 5. So then what I end up with in this animation, the shadow was more on the ground. Oh, well, no, you can actually, I'll show you how to do that in a minute. So here we have this ball. It's coming down, and every time it hits, the shadow bounces along, right? Here's what you can do, which is pretty interesting with the whole thing. I can take this, let's see if I can do this. I can make a copy of this object. Let's see, let me go to my library, which I lost because it's down here because I don't have a whole lot of room. Here, let me see if I can do this. Duplicate the layer. Sure. Preset copy. We'll bring it below. So here's my preset copy layer. I'm going to hide this one for a second. Here's my preset copy layer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, hide my library. And I'm going to see if I can get going there. Okay, there. I have just the shadow. Let's change the shadow. And now let's change the, shadow would probably be a little bit more skewed like that. And then we can move the shadow down and start changing the path. Probably what I'd have to do here, I know what I can do here. I can just select all of this, I'm going to click and drag through all this. I'm going to remove those frames and re-stretch this out to the end and make sure that this ball ends up in the same place that this ends up, down over here, like that. How about that? So I end up with, now of course that shadow is a little bright. I can obviously adjust it. I'll select the shadow. I can change the color maybe to a gray. There, that helps. I can change the strength to 40%. There we go. Now let's test it. Of course, I would have had to do that I would have had to do that at the beginning, because of that last keyframe I'll have to do the exact same thing. So I select the last frame, select the ball, change the color to gray, change the strength to 40, and now we see that. Sure, you would need to skew it, you would need to make the changes, but the important thing there is the understanding of the thinking that goes into that. So let's back up for a second and talk about what Caroline asked about, which is if I wanted to create a shadow that follows along a different area, then what I can do is I can take the object that I want to have shadowed and make a copy of it. So let me do the whole thing again. Here's my ball. It's got its own little shadow with it, and that's fine. But if I want there to be a shadow that's going along the bottom, probably what I would do is I would right-click and duplicate the layer. As soon as I duplicate the layer, it made a copy of the exact same object. But since I want the object to follow along the bottom, let me do a two-step process of removing all the rest of the frames on that layer by going Shift F5, and then taking that ball, maybe skewing it a little bit more. We're not going to see that layer, just that one. And then going to the end point, showing this one, and putting a new keyframe down over here, F6, putting that ball down there as well. Okay. And of course, what we want to do to the ball before we do that, let's go back and just select that ball, hide this other layer. And here's that ball. We want to look, and this is because of the fact that it's a movie clip. So this is an important feature. I made a copy of that layer, which makes a copy of that same symbol. And this will only work with a movie clip. Once I have the symbol, then I can look at my filters and I can see that I can hide the object. Okay? And then I could blur the object more. I can change the strength of the object. And now I have something that's starting to look like a shadow. So now that I've done that, I'll turn this back on. I'll go out to frame 75. And on that new preset copy layer, I can hit the F6 key and move the ball to down over there. And we see that the ball is following the object. I can make it come down below it, so this probably looks more realistic. And when it hits right there, where it really stretches out right there, then I can skew that more. Okay? and then comes back up, I'd have to unskew it, right? And continue to unskew it. And notice how it's adding keyframes. And then right there, I'd have to skew it more. And unskew it. And finally, down here, I'd skew it again. And over here, I'd unskew it. So now I end up with something that looks like this. Have to work on the skewing a little bit, but you can see that that's a pretty straightforward approach. And the key to the whole thing is working with the movie clip, going to the Properties panel, and adjusting the drop shadow filter so you actually hide the object itself, and you're just messing with the drop shadow associated with that object. I can even, let's say when the ball first hits down over here, I can make it more dramatic by adding a second filter like a glow, right? And the glow can either be a gradient, it can be, you know, a full glow, and we can see that that glow makes a little bit of a difference there too. So that's the idea of working with motion presets, and that was really where this whole conversation commenced. Window, motion presets. There are all these different motion presets. If you create your own motion preset, you can then save it, and you can then save it into the custom presets area. The book does deal with motion presets when you get into, I believe, chapter 7, which is where it also brings up the shape hints that we covered today. Okay? So, why don't we do this? It's 10:30. We're going to take a 10-minute break because we've been going for an hour and a half now. And when we come back, I'm going to cover with you the animating of masks, and then take a look at a few other little, and then take a look at the motion editor. So animating masks and the motion editor. Let's take our 10-minute break. Okay, we're back, and we're going to talk about animating masks to start off with. So one of the things that is important to know about Flash is that you can create varieties of animations. We started off today talking about several different types of animations. We talked about the way that you can create motion tweens, classic tweens, shape tweens, and you can even create these frame-by-frame animations, which are labor-intensive, and that's something that I showed you in the video that prepares you for the homework too that's due tonight. There's another type of animation which is called a mask. It's a little subtle. I'm going to show you basically how that works. So we have this object on the stage. I've got 3 layers here. And first, we've got just the fact that we're covering animating masks at this moment. And then I've got another layer beneath that. It says the word mask. Now this star is going to be the mask that I'm using in just a minute. And then below that, we have a layer that says content. So we are going to see that this is only a single frame. Now, if I go out to frame 48, since this is a 24 frame per second animation, I'm going to hit the F5 key, and Caroline knows exactly what that does. The F5 key adds what kind of frames? Well, actually, it just adds frames, not keyframes. F6 adds the keyframes, right? So we now have 3 layers that are just static, right? They last for 2 seconds because our frame rate is 24. Frame rate is 24 frames per second. Well, let's say I wanted to have this airplane gradually reveal itself. What I would do is I'm going to go in here and I'm going to actually change this to a different shape because it makes more sense to do it with this kind of shape. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this mask. I'm going to locate it, let's say, right here in the center. Make it really small. And then go out to frame 48, and I'll just say create a motion tween, and then on frame 48, I'll make it really big. Okay. So basically, what this circle is doing is it's just getting from really small to really big. The question is, what does that have to do with masks? Because if I show this right now, all you see is that. What it has to do with masks is if I right-click on that layer and I choose Mask, what happens is that the layer beneath it gets indented, and let's see what happens from the beginning. So what's happening is that as that shape expands, it reveals what's under the shape. In order to see it in live time, you have to lock both of those layers, and you see it reveals the shape underneath. Now, obviously, I can make changes to that. Let's say I wanted to just see different portions of the object. So I go to frame 1. And this is where Flash is very fussy. It's hard to resize when you're not completely zoomed in. So I'm going to resize this a little bit. I'll zoom back out. Now, I'll select that object, and I'll start by showing the tail. And we'll make it a little bigger still. Okay, so it starts by showing nothing, and then it gradually starts showing portions of the object. And we'll show. We won't get it any bigger yet. We'll just say, and now we want to see this portion of the object, and then we got to frame 20, and we still don't want it to get bigger, so we're going to show this portion of the object. And frame 30, we still don't want it to get bigger. We're going to show this portion of the object, and finally, frame 40, we're going to see it like that. So it's going to reveal portions of the plane, and then eventually reveal the whole plane. And we can make that animation look smoother. It's really, I've got to tell you, when I shut off my phone before class starts, it never rings. The one day that I forget to shut off the phone, it rings incessantly. Okay. So what I've done here is I've created a little bit smoother of a path. And when I lock the layer, watch what happens. Right? I could slow down the frame rate so we can see it a little easier and play it again. Okay, so that's how you animate a mask. You create a shape, and that shape in this case is simply a circle. It's a graphic symbol. And as it rolls over the layer beneath it, it reveals what's showing only in the area of the shape. Does that make sense? Good. Okay. Now, how might you use that in a different scenario? Well, let me get rid of these layers and create a new layer. And maybe I have this layer say what I did earlier. Take the text, make it bigger. How do you make the shape into a mask again? Well, that's not the shape. First, you turn the shape into a symbol. Once you turn the shape into a symbol, you take the layer and you turn it into a mask. But I'll show you that in just a minute. So here's our text. Here's our mask. I go into my library. I choose my GR mask. And I then right-click and say mask. And by doing that, it locks both of those layers, and it indents the layer beneath it. The problem is that in order to complete this process, you've got to unlock that mask layer. So what I would probably do is move that to here. I would then motion tween this, go out to frame 25, move that to there, and then go out to frame 40, move it back to there, and have it go like that. So we should see, okay, there's one problem with that. Okay, let's try that again. Go to this frame, move that to here. Oopsie, I didn't want to go out to that frame. Sorry, I want to go to this frame, move that out here. So first of all, it's going across, and what it's going to do is it's going to reveal the letters one at a time. Okay, and then when I get to frame 35, I want it to go back to the center, and then by frame 48, I want it to reveal the whole text. So what we should see is it goes across. That's because I did that last reveal. I should add a different type of keyframe here. I should, on this frame here, I'm going to right click and insert scale keyframe. And that, I'm just wanting to get that scale happening there. It shouldn't be scaled there. Here, I want this to be back the way it was. Okay, there we go. That's what I want to see. So now when I lock this layer, I go to the timeline, I lock the layer, what we see is the letters get revealed, comes back to the center, and it expands, right? And at the very first frame, if I wanted to make sure that nothing shows, I'd move that off to the side, I'd lock it again, right? Slow down the frame rate just so we can see this a little easier. That's another example of how you would use a mask. Okay? Any questions about the masks? Okay, so at this point we've covered keyframes in the timeline, tweening, motion tweening, shape tweening, classic tweening. We've looked at motion guides. We've looked at motion presets. We've looked at animating masks. And we've looked at shape hints. The one thing that I have not covered that the book covers rather extensively is the motion editor. I'm going to do that now and then leave any time for any remaining questions. So let's first just get a quick review of what we have in this timeline. We've got 5 different layers. Are there any animations in here? And how do I know? Without playing it, by looking at the timeline. How do I know? That's right. I see that there are keyframes, but the question is, are there any animations looking at that timeline? Look at the color of the frames. Look at the color of each of the layer timelines. No, thank you. Thank you, exactly. Because they're gray. Remember, gray indicates static timelines. Okay, since I'm no longer away, I will take myself out of the away box there. Because of the fact that these are gray layers, that means there are no animations. Okay, now this airplane layer is set up to have an animation. It has an object moving from one spot to the second spot to the third spot, but it's not actually animating, it's just moving. But because of the fact that this is already a graphic symbol, what type of animation would I put in here? Would I put a shape tween or motion tween? Yeah, so what I can do is I can select that layer, I can right-click on any of the frames within the layer and click Create Motion Tween. So now we see what it should do is it should move smoothly from point A to point B. Now, because of the fact that this was set up with these keyframes, it's not doing what you'd expect. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to get rid of this keyframe by going Shift F6. And then I'm going to get rid of this keyframe by going Shift F6. And now is when I would right-click and say Create Motion Tween. Go to my last frame and move that right over there. So now we see the path is going like that. Of course, if I wanted to follow this trajectory that I have here, I'd put the cursor right around there, and I would drag this in an upward direction so it follows that path. Okay? So that's how I would create the motion tween very quickly and easily. Now, if I wanted to use the motion editor to enhance this, I could double-click or single click on Motion Editor, and if you don't see Motion Editor, you choose Window, Motion Editor. And you can see that within the Motion Editor, I have control over the basic motion along the x-axis, which is this way, along the y-axis, which is vertical, and along the z-axis if I'm dealing with movie clips, which will allow some other things. But it also enables rotation. And then I can skew it, I can change my colors, and I can ease it in or ease it out. So let's say I want it to take off and land, and it slows down when it lands, right? So what I can do is I can select that last frame, and I can say ease, and I can change the ease so it eases out. So it starts fast and slows down and lands. Notice that again. It slows down at the end. And that's called easing out. And the way I did that was I simply selected the last frame of the timeline where that motion tween occurred, and in the Properties panel where it showed the motion tween, I said ease out. Now I might want to orient it a little differently, so maybe when it takes off, the front of the plane is tilting up slightly. What I can do is I can select this and tilt it up like that. But then right at this point, I would need to tilt it back down. Right? So we see it's coming and then but it's tilting back down too soon. So what I do is I add a very slight shift, and then on the next frame, a big shift. So then what we end up with is it's coming up. It's still happening too early. So right there, we see in our motion editor, and this is again where we have challenges with screen real estate. I'm going to close some of these so I can get to my motion editor. Give me some room, please. There we go. Load this up a little bit. Right there, we see my basic motion along my y-axis. I can take that motion. Yeah, this is just really challenging in terms of the amount of space that I have here. I can take that right there, and I can change the rotation right by selecting that and dragging that, right? Dragging that down. And I should be able to, let's see, I can smooth that. There we go. I smooth that transition by right-clicking and say smooth. Okay. And when my motion editor gets to that point right there, again, I have so little room in here to show you what's going on, but you can see that the angle is rotating much smoother at that point. And every keyframe, I also have these rotation handles, so I can smooth it as well by doing this. Okay? And let me pull this whole motion editor out so we can just see the motion editor. It's hard to, now of course we can't see the rest of the animation, but that's the best I can do in this scenario. Okay, so let's take a look at this motion editor, and we can see there are a variety of elements that I can control. I can control the basic motion, the X and the Y. I can control the tweening along the Z-axis, which has to do with the motions. And if I can just zoom in on that for a second, we can see that I can scrub my playback head and I can step forward one frame at a time, and I can see the rotation numbers changing. Right? So when I get to this point, the rotation is negative 20 degrees, and it stays negative 20 degrees. We see a change at the very beginning, yeah. This part is really the hardest thing for me to do in live time. Okay, hold on just one second. I'm going to pause this. Okay, so I was really running into some problems with getting the motion editor to respond. Part of the problem is with a screen that you need to, when you're working with the motion editor, you want to be able to see your main stage and your motion editor at the same time, and that's pretty challenging to do, especially when the screen is being shared and the processor is lagging. So I'm going to refer you to the book pages 165 to 170 to discuss the motion editor in more effective detail. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about onion skinning to finish up. And I already showed you some cool things about the shadow. We can enhance this shadow a little bit. But this final example from our book, I'm going to say onion skinning and more shadow adjustments. So the final chapter of the final exercise file of Lesson 5 in the book shows many of the things we've been discussing. It shows a classic tween, which occurs, okay. There's nothing occurring on the classic tween layer. Is that true? Oh, there it is. It's the cloud. Okay. And it's the, yeah, let me try this again. Do this, and this, and this. Okay, we see a classic tween, and we see what that classic tween is doing is it's following that motion guide. As a review, the way we get the motion guide to show up is you select your tween, you right-click on it and say Add Classic Motion Guide. What that does is it indents your tween and it puts a motion guide above it, which you then draw a line to follow. So we see that that's what's happening with that. Okay. We also have a shape morph occurring, which is that the moon is morphing into a bird, also known as a shape tween. Shape tweens happen to shapes only. We then also see we've got two standard motion tweens here, the airplane and the sun. Okay, and then we see we've got this shadow happening below. And finally, we see there's a diagram that shows how this whole thing is working together. What does that have to do with onion skinning? Well, if I take, I'm going to hide the motion guide, the classic tween, the shape morph, and the sun for right now. I've got the airplane and the shadow. If I want to make sure that those objects are moving in a way that I can really adjust as I go along, I could turn on onion skinning right here. Where is it? Right there. I can turn on onion skinning, and I can see the relationship of each of those objects within a span of a certain number of frames. So what we see is I can see the shadow, and I can see the airplane, the airplane one is locked, so I'll unlock that. So now I have the shadow and the airplane unlocked, and I see my playback head is on frame 3. But even though I am seeing frame 3 a little brighter than the other frames, I see 2 frames before it, and I see 2 frames after it when I'm working with onion skinning. I can stretch that out, though, and I can see 10 whole frames. So wherever my cursor is, I can see the path in terms of looking at the frames in front of it and behind it. This becomes much more critical when you're working in a frame-by-frame animation. Let's say I took this airplane, and I'm not suggesting that you should do this, but let's say I took this airplane and I converted it to a frame-by-frame animation. The way I do that is I simply right-click on that motion tween and choose Convert to Frame-by-Frame Animation. Then what I see is I see the current frame that I've got selected, and I see the frames, 2 frames before it in this case, and a certain number of frames after it. So let's say I only wanted to see the frames after it. I can choose that. Then I can go to the next frame. So this is where the problem that I might run into with a motion editor, I would be able to not have that problem here. So let's go back to the beginning. I scrub the playback head. And let's say at the beginning I want that angle to be a little more pointed upwards. And where did my tools go? There they are. Okay, so I would select that first keyframe and I tilt it ever so slightly upwards. And then it's flying, and then right there, if I want to start tilting it downwards, I can see where it's positioned, and I can see each frame after it in terms of its position going downwards. So I'd have to go to the next frame and adjust it downwards. And of course, in this case, I'd probably want to see a few frames before it as well. So I select each frame, and now I can see the position of the wings in relationship to the frames after it and the frames in front of it. So it's a little more time-consuming in terms of the control, but the onion skinning allows you to get whoopsie, that was squishing the plane a little. The onion skinning gives you a little bit more organic control of the object as it's coming into place. So in this case, it's going to be looking like a little bit more of a way that a plane would land. And as it gets to the end, it looks like it's getting ready to take off again. So I turn my onion skinning back off, and I see it do a nice little dip like that. Okay, so onion skinning is something that's particularly useful for frame-by-frame animations. And as a byproduct of showing you that, we saw that you can take any motion tween, right-click on it, and convert it to a frame-by-frame animation. So in summary, we've covered the keyframes in the timeline, the tweening, the motion tweens, the shape tweening, the motion presets, the animating masks, the shape hints, as well as onion skinning. And the motion editor is something that you're going to review on pages 166 to 170 in the textbook. In terms of homework for next week, all you'll need to do is review the videos on the Adobe website. When I select this video, what you'll see here is it takes you to a website called tv.adobe.com, and you'll see that there are a variety of episodes here, everything from an explanation of what Adobe Flash Professional is about, a review of the Flash interface, talk a little about the welcome screen, the main menu bar and the list of options and commands that can help you work effectively within there, the Flash toolbar, working in the stage, and the work area. So those are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 actually short videos. Each one is about 2 minutes, anywhere from 40 seconds to, I think the longest one is a minute and a half. Yeah. So they're from 40 seconds to a minute and a half length, and you'll want to stop there because then after that it goes into talking about generating sprite sheets, which is something that we haven't gotten to yet. But I do want you to just familiarize yourself with the content there, and then read the lesson 5 from the textbook and just go over the exercises in there. So now I want to give you the opportunity to ask me questions on things that we've covered up until now. If you have any questions or some other things, if you want to throw them into the mix, that's perfectly fine as well. Plane's moving around. There we go. So, play around some more. Sure, it's always a good idea to play around. Lacey or Olga, any questions? Okay, good. So this is a little over 2 hours that we've been going over Flash. The homework that is due tonight, as we said at the beginning of class, is that this animation, which includes a static background, a frame-by-frame, and a shape tween in a single file. This tutorial here is very extensive, and I went through step-by-step in terms of not only showing you how to do it, but I really spent a lot of detail. I went over it in great detail, so all of these different types of animations should be things that you feel comfortable with at this point. Okay? So if there aren't any questions, that's going to wrap it up for today. I will have office hours from 12 until 2, and I will be available. The way you get to my office hours, remember, is simply go to Online Resources, choose Online Office, click Enter as Guest, put in your name, and enter the room. I'll be there from 12 until 2. Thank you so much for showing up. I really enjoy a lot more when there are people in the room. When I'm lecturing with my Dreamweaver class, I've got about 15 people who show up, and Flash just a handful. So thanks very much. I'll see you all next week. Thanks for coming.